ladies and gentlemen, good evening. How are you? Tonight's lesson, tonight's class in the schus and the merit of Yitzchak, Tzvi, and Yosef and Zipporah Bat Hoshea is going to be, God willing, a very, very interesting class discussing a very fundamentally important concept in how we understand our relationship with God. And that is a very important question that many people struggle with. Many very sincere Jews that really want to be connected to God and feel a relationship with God, they struggle with the following question. And that question is, how can I feel like I have an individual, unique, personal relationship with God when it seems that every single detail of Judaism is controlled by religion, every single aspect of our day, every single thing that we do, every single thing we eat, every prayer is all scripted. It's all controlled by religion and by Jewish law. We all go to the same shul to chant the same prayers. We observe the same rituals. We more or less keep the holidays the same way. And the issue that many Jews have with religion, with Judaism in a organized manner, in an organized fashion, is that it seems that if we're all practicing religion the same way, and if we're all doing the same things, then my relationship with God is kind of wholesale. It's kind of a generic, one-size-fits-all Judaism that is not unique to me and to my personality and to my soul and to my character. And Judaism, to be a good Jew, requires me to ignore my own personality and just fit into the mold. Good evening, everyone that's watching. Good evening, Susie. Good evening, Andrea. Good evening, Yonatan. We mentioned your parents. Good evening, Morty. So that is the question that we need to address tonight. How is our Judaism unique, or is it a one-size-fits-all religion? And we're going to address that by discussing one of the most important mitzvot in the entire Torah, and that is the mitzvah of a bris milah, of a circumcision. Thousands of years ago, Judaism begins when the very first Jew, a very remarkable, amazing, unique individual, Avram, Avinu Abraham, our forefather, becomes a Jew. What is the covenant that makes him into a Jew? Good evening, Sivan. What is the covenant that formally begins and cements this relationship between us, between Abraham and God? It is the circumcision. And so I am going to, I don't have it here in front of me because we closed it. We're going to read, if you want to read a few verses inside, we closed the page because we had to reset everything. But the end of this week's Torah reading is the story where God comes to Abraham and he says to Avram, I know how righteous and how loyal and how amazing you've been. I'm not going to bother reading inside. You all know the story. And basically God says to Avram, I want to make with you a bris. I want to make with you a covenant. And through this covenant, you and your seed after you will be connected to me, l'dorotam, for all generations. And I'm going to read outside, and God says, this is the covenant, those brisi, this is the covenant that I will make beini uvenechem, between me and between you, uvein zarecha acharecha, and your children after you, that you should circumcise every male, and this circumcision will be for an os bris, for a sign of the covenant between me and between you, etc. And this is the idea, and God tells him for all future generations, at the age of 8 days old, everyone should be circumcised. And indeed, for hundreds of years, all of the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Avraham are all circumcised. When the Jews came down to Egypt, they are circumcised. And this is the symbol of being from the family of Avraham Avinu. Erev Tov, Jacob. If anyone is watching, wants to say good evening, please do so. Until we come to Har Sinai, Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, the Jews accept the Torah. The Torah is 613 commandments, and one of the 613 commandments is a verse in the Vayikra Leviticus where God explicitly commands the Jewish people, Ubayom Hashmini, and on the 8th day, every single child shall have his foreskin be circumcised. And so, even though it is true that our forefathers, that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob kept the entire Torah even before it had been given, but when they kept the Torah, they were doing it more as a voluntary act of spiritual connection to God. They were holy people, they were spiritual people, and they were trying to connect to God. However, when the Jewish people stood at the foot of Mount Sinai, and we said to God the famous words, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will accept whatever God says, we will do it exactly as God says. At that moment, the idea of doing a bris no longer was something we were voluntarily choosing to do, but it became an obligation. It became a chov, it became an obligation that every Jew must be circumcised. And while this is true of every mitzvah became an obligation in Mount Sinai, this is even more true for a mitzvah like the circumcision, where God clearly says that this is a commandment upon you, not because of the fact that Abraham did it, but because I am commanding you. In fact, the Rambam, Maimonides, very clearly states that any mitzvah that the Jewish people have today is not because our forefathers did them, but because God told us to do so. And in fact, the example that the Rambam brings is of a circumcision. And the Rambam says explicitly that when a Jewish person has a bris, the reason is not because God told Avram to have a bris at the age of 99 years old. The reason is because God commanded us in Mount Sinai to have a bris, right? And Mount Sinai, God gave us 613 commandments, and one of those given at Mount Sinai is a circumcision. So far, everything I said makes perfect sense. The question is, the obvious question, is I'm sure that every one of you that are watching tonight has been to many, many circumcisions and many bris milah ceremonies. If you paid attention during the ceremony to the blessings that were made, there's actually two different blessings that are made at a bris. The first blessing is made by the father, and the second blessing is made by the mohel. Sorry, the other way around. The first blessing is made by the mohel, and the second blessing is made by the father, unless, of course, the father is brave enough to act as the mohel, which is what I did by my children's bris, where I was the one who actually did the cut. I still have to pay to have a mohel there because to know how to bandage it, how to prep it, but the actual cut was done by myself. But otherwise, it's two different blessings. The first one is Baruch Atah Hashem Asher Kedishanu, who commanded us on the mitzvah of doing a bris. That's what the mohel says. But the second blessing is Baruch Atah Hashem, etc. Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvotav, that He sanctified us with His commandments. V'tzivan, and He commanded us lahachniso bibriso or bibrito shel Avram Avinu. That God commanded us to bring our child into the covenant of Avraham Avinu. This is how we describe the bris at the bris milah ceremony. The bris shel Avraham Avinu, the covenant of God with Abraham. So if, as we just explained, the reason for the circumcision is not because that's what Avram did at the age of 99, but it's because God commanded us at Mount Sinai to have a circumcision. So why do we ascribe the entire bris milah ceremony and covenant and describe it as the briso shel Avraham Avinu, as the brit, as a covenant of Abraham? I understand he deserves to get married, he deserves to be mentioned, he was the first one to get circumcised, but to call it the bris of Avraham seems to imply that the reason why we are being circumcised is because of Avraham and not because of the commandment of God at Mount Sinai. So what we will learn tonight, what we will discover tonight, is that there is something about the circumcision of Avraham Avinu that remains relevant and unique even today after Sinai, even today, which is a unique part of the circumcision that even today, when the reason why we do a bris is because of what God commanded us to do, even today there's an element of a bris that's unique to Avraham Avinu. And for all the ladies that are watching, This dimension of a bris is relevant to ladies as much as it is to men. There is a spiritual dimension to the bris that is unique to what Avraham Avinu did, as we will learn from this week's Torah reading. So, let's understand what was, I hope so far we're clear. Let's understand what exactly was the bris of Avraham. What was the nature of the covenant that God made with Abraham? And how was that different than the nature of the covenant that we, the Jewish nation, made with God at Mount Sinai? So again, I'm sure all of you watching are familiar with the basic story of the Jews at Mount Sinai, where not only we said Na'aseh v'nishma, but where we offered sacrifices to God. And then Moshe took from the blood of the sacrifices, he sprinkled it upon us, and he said, behold, the blood of the covenant, which I'm sprinkling upon you, will be the bris, the covenant between you and God. And at that time, when the Jewish people unanimously and unilaterally accepted to do all the commandments that God gave us, every single Jew, not only the Jews that were alive then, but every single Jew and all the descendants, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren of the Jews that were alive then, became obligated to observe every commandment of the Torah. So you can ask a simple question: why is it my fault that my great-great-grandfather decided to do a bris, to do a circumcision? That's not my fault. That's his fault. I didn't ask him to make a circumcision. I didn't ask him to make a covenant with God and to accept upon himself to keep kosher. How did me and you, who were not alive at Mount Sinai, we weren't there physically, so how did we become bound and obligated by the agreement of our forefathers at Mount Sinai? And so the answer, that again I'm sure some of you may know, the explanation is that the covenant of Sinai was not a typical legal covenant made between two parties. Rather, the covenant of Sinai was a spiritual covenant that was made between God and our souls. The Jewish souls that were at Mount Sinai, every single soul was at Mount Sinai. Remember, a soul is not limited to time, a soul is not limited to space, and therefore every single soul, every single neshama was at Mount Sinai, experiencing Mount Sinai. That's why there's a very good dating site called Saw You at Sinai, because every single soul was at Mount Sinai, even those souls that had not yet been born into a body. By the way, this is a very interesting halachic ramification. We know that in Jewish law, in general, when a person makes a vow, they have to keep whatever they said they're going to do. So if you make a vow to do something and you don't do it, you have transgressed a mitzvah, you have done a sin. However, so see something a second? However, you have done a sin. However, if you make an oath that was never considered valid, then there's no problem if you don't fulfill the oath that you made. So for example, if a person said, I make a vow, I'm going to jump 50 feet up in the air. And then of course they don't jump 50 feet up in the air. There's no problem. They've not done a sin. Because since the oath was never possible to begin with, therefore the oath was never binding, and it's not as if they've transgressed an oath by not jumping 50 feet in the air. The same thing is true if a person makes an oath to transgress a mitzvah in the Torah. A person makes an oath, I'm not going to give charity to this poor person. And then they go and they give charity to this poor person. They have not considered, have they done the sin? Because as the Talmud explains, an oath that's made against something in the Torah is an invalid oath. You know why? Because you already made an oath at Mount Sinai to do the Torah. So for you to make an oath that's against an oath you already made is an oath that never had any legal validity or legal ramification, because you already had a preceding oath from before. When did we make an oath at Mount Sinai? The point is every single Jew's soul was at Mount Sinai. So you are obligated to do the commandments, to do the Torah, not just because your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, great-great-great-grandmother was at Mount Sinai and made an oath. No, you're obligated to do the commandments, not because you're reincarnated from a previous generation that was there, but your soul, as it is in you, your soul was at Mount Sinai. And your soul, maybe in the more general sense, but your soul is at Mount Sinai, and therefore your soul is obligated. It swore, it made an oath to keep the commandments. And this is the beginning of the unbreakable bond, the covenant of us and God. The beginning of being what made us into Jews was this moment when our soul stood at Mount Sinai and our soul made a promise to God that it would be loyal and faithful to doing the commandments that God gave us. So far we get it. Now, when we do a mitzvah, you give charity. We mentioned charity. So let's talk about charity. You give $100 to charity. Even though the mitzvah is done with your body and through your body, with your body, the impact of the mitzvah is on your soul. Meaning, if I look at you, if I look at your hand, I can't see that your hand is any different if you had given charity this morning or if you didn't give charity this morning. Your physical hand will remain the same hand whether or not I give charity. The impact of the mitzvah, the impact of giving charity is on your soul. The same is true with every single mitzvah. Whether or not you put on tefillin this morning, or whether or not you ate kosher this morning, from the body, when you look at the person, you don't see any physical change to the person because they ate kosher or non-kosher. I mean, maybe the waistline, but that can be non-kosher too. There's no physical difference. The impact of eating kosher is on your soul. And the impact of praying is on your soul. And the impact of giving charity is on your soul, etc., etc. The only single mitzvah that is an exception to this idea that we do the mitzvahs, we do them with our body, but the impact and the change is on our souls. The only mitzvah you see the most clearly and obviously is the mitzvah of Brit Milah. The mitzvah of a bris must be carved into the actual flesh of the person. Meaning, you're literally branding your relationship with God into your body forever. There's no other mitzvah that has that kind of a real, recognizable change to the body as does the bris. And this is the point of a circumcision. This is what's so unique about a circumcision. That at the tender age of 8 days old, when a child begins a relationship with God, this relationship is total. This relationship includes the entire self. In the most ungodly part of the body is the stamp of this covenant. In the most ungodly part of the body is the most physically visible, tangible sign of the fact that I am a Jew in a relationship with God. And this demonstrates that there's absolutely no part of the child which is being left out of the relationship. All of the body, all of the person in your entire totality is in a relationship with God Almighty. And this brings us to a very interesting conversation, which is, when does your soul enter your body? When does your soul enter your body? So the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya that the entering of the godly soul, what we call the nefesh or the godly soul, begins when a child has his circumcision. For a girl, the soul enters the body immediately, which is why our custom is to name the child as soon as possible, because when you give the child a Jewish name is not just a way of identifying or speaking to the person, but a Jewish name actually is an expression of the actual soul itself. And therefore, our custom is to give a girl her name at the very first opportunity that presents itself. In fact, I myself, and I know many people, I had more than one child on a holiday. My daughter Simi was born on the day before Sukkot, and the first chance to name her was on the first day of Sukkot, the next day. And I walked back and forth from the hospital. I slept in the hospital in Coralton Medical, and I walked the 3 miles or whatever it is to come to the synagogue to do the baby naming, and then to walk back to the hospital to tell my wife, what the name was. And the same thing, my daughter Menucha was born. My daughter Menucha was born at I don't know what time, middle of the night, Friday night, 12 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, something like that. Very, very late on Friday night. And Saturday morning, hours after she was born, I walked the 3 miles to the synagogue, not to wait even, and it was on the Saturday, and I could have waited till Monday, and then my parents and my in-laws and the family could have watched on Zoom. This is pre-Zoom days. There was once a time when Zoom didn't exist. But we could have, but we don't. We do it immediately because the naming, the Jewish name of a child, carries a part of the soul in it, and the soul is entering into the body with the name. So for a girl, it happens immediately, but for a boy, that's only 5 days old, he is not considered a baby, for example. No, so he's definitely a baby. He's alive. But what does that mean? So let's explain, Yonatan. What does that mean? That the godly soul. What does the author mean? That the godly soul enters at birth. At a bris. So obviously, it doesn't mean that you don't have a soul till then. The soul is connected to the body from the moment that the child is conceived. Already, the soul begins its own journey down from the spiritual realms to come into the body. We know that a child is taught the whole Torah in utero. The fetus has an angel that sits in the womb. I don't know, sits in the womb, but there's an angel that teaches the body, that teaches the person Torah. So obviously, the child has a relationship. The child has a relationship with its soul before the bris. However, when the child is a fetus, when it's in utero, it doesn't have an identity of its own. It's living off the mother's food, off the mother's blood, off the mother's food. It's breathing from the mother. It doesn't have an identity of its own. And even after it's born and now begins to breathe independently, it begins to eat independently, the life that it has is what we would call in Kabbalah a nefesh hachiyunis, which means a vivifying soul, a life force. It's the nefesh that allows it to exist, to be alive, that allows it to breathe, to eat, to sleep, to cry, to make noises. But it's godly soul. It's nefesh elokis, as Yonatan wrote, does not enter the body until the bris. Why at the bris? Because at the bris, when the child is circumcised, this is when the godly part of the soul is now connected to the body. Meaning now the unique connection that we have to God is no longer a spiritual identity disconnected from the physical body, but at the moment of circumcision, this spiritual soul becomes merged, it becomes united, it becomes physically engraved, physically united in a physical way, in a tangible way, with the body in a physical way. And that only happens at the circumcision. So here we see something very, very important that will now help us understand the difference between the circumcision, the covenant of the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, and the covenant of Abraham when they had a circumcision. When the Jewish people made a covenant with God, that covenant with God at Mount Sinai was a covenant of the soul. The soul said, God, we're yours. God, whatever you say, we'll do. But the circumcision of Avraham Avinu was a covenant that existed between God and the physical reality of Avraham Avinu. Meaning, when God commanded Avram to circumcise himself, it was as a permanent sign of God in the flesh of Avram. Abraham and God already had a relationship long before Avram turned 99 years old and long before he had a circumcision. But the relationship that God and Abraham had until he was 99 years old was primarily a spiritual relationship. It was a soul relationship. It was separate from the body. And the moment of the moment of Avram's bris is when that became within the flesh. So listen, my friends. It's true that our technical contemporary obligation to circumcise ourselves or our children is a mitzvah that we received through Moses at Mount Sinai. But the essence, the unique characteristic and quality of what is the power of a circumcision This is something that was given to us by Abraham many, many, many years before Mount Sinai. And we, as the great grandchildren of Abraham, we inherit this unique ability to incorporate the unique idea that in our corporeal body, in our physical, tangible body, we can have a relationship with God. In other words, what Avram gave us is the ability to transform the material physical body into a spiritual vehicle for God. Understand? I want to say it again to make sure this is clear. It's a fine point, but it's an important point. We perform the mitzvah, I am circumcised. Everyone is circumcised. Why do we circumcise our children? Because God told us to. That's the reason why we do the mitzvah. But the uniqueness of the mitzvah, the fact that this mitzvah allows us to transform our physical identity into a relationship with God, that our Judaism is not purely a soulful experience between my soul and my spiritual identity and God, but that my Judaism should be part of my physical identity, part of the way I exist on a physical level. That's a unique gift that only the circumcision is able to show us, inherited as a gift from our forefather, from Avraham Avinu. And that's why the mitzvah of a bris is truly a unique commandment from every one of the other 613 commandments. And this is the idea of having it stamped in our body to show that ultimately our entire life is in a way that we are one in our physical way with God. Understand? And this is not only for a man, for a woman too. There's a global message here. The message of a bris is that every part of my physical identity has a relationship with God. Judaism is not only a spiritual thing, it's a physical thing as well. Okay? By the way, I want to go back just for a second to the blessings that are made by the bris. So at a bris, there's 3 different statements that are made. The first blessing made at a bris is the blessing made by the mohel. The mohel says, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, who commanded us on the mitzvah of circumcision." The second thing, as I said before, is the father says, "Thank you, God, for entering my child, for the opportunity to enter my child into the covenant of Abraham." And then all of the crowd that is gathered at the bris, and again, I'm sure you all remember this, you're at the bris, and everyone says together, "Ki Hashem shenichnas lebris," just as you, this child, entered into a bris, into a covenant with God, so too Cain, Yikanos l'Torah, l'chupol l'ma'asim tovim, so too should you enter into Torah, into good deeds, to marriage, into good deeds. Meaning there's 3 things here. Number 1 is there's a technical aspect of the bris. The technical aspect is it's a commandment in the Bible, so the mohel makes a blessing and says, we're going to do a mitzvah that God commanded us to do. Fine, technical. But then the father says, we are going to create a relationship with God that is unique to what Avram Avinu, Avram our forefather, gave us at Mount Sinai. What Avram Avinu gave us when he was circumcised at 99 years old, where he no longer only had a spiritual relationship with God, but where the physical identity of his being became connected to God. And this is the second dimension, that we are giving a blessing on being able to bring God into our physical existence. And then the crowd that's gathering gives a blessing to the child and says to the child, just as you were entered into a physical covenant with God in a physical way in your physical body, so too may you extend that into every area of your physical life, into your actions, into your study of Torah, into your chuppah, into your marriage, that your physical marriage, your romance, your home, your married life, the family you build should be a physical embodiment of a spiritual relationship with God. Okay. Now let me address Vindy Islander's very good question, which I kind of addressed without making it into a formal question, because I thought someone would ask the question, so I kind of addressed it. But since you're asking it, I'll address it formally, which is, what about a woman? How does a woman have a relationship in the physical with God? The answer the Talmud tells, I think it's in the Talmud, that a woman is considered kimahila damya, which means she's considered as she's already circumcised. A man has an organ of the body that is, we all know how it can behave, and that organ needs to be circumcised. The foreskin that needs to be removed. The woman never has that because she is born circumcised, meaning a woman is born with the ability that in her physical body she has a spiritual relationship, meaning much more for a man than for a woman, the physical and the spiritual are separate entities. In general, men are much more compartmentalized. So we have a physical reality to us, we have our spiritual reality. And very often for men, and women don't understand this because women don't operate this way, but for men, now I'm praying, now I'm spiritual, now I'm religious, and now I'm physical, now I'm enjoying life. The two are not connected. The fact that this morning I was praying and I was all spiritual and holy, what did that do with the fact that now I want to have a good time? So therefore, a man needs the actual reminder, the actual change in the physical body to be able to create a spiritual relationship within his physical identity. Whereas for a woman, the spiritual power of a woman is strong enough that just their spiritual power can affect their physical identity. It begins with Avram, for a woman as well. The idea of transforming the physical identity is part of the bris that's represented by Avram. And that's why the idea of a bris is relevant to a woman as well on a spiritual level. But on the physical level, the woman doesn't need the actual act, because they don't need that physical act to bring their spirituality into their physicality. I hope that answers your question. How a physical is, yes, Andrea. A physical man needs a physical action. That's why men need to do physical tefillin. Many of the physical commandments that exist. Why does a man need to wear tzitzit and not a woman? Same thing. There's a technical reason. The mitzvah has a time limit on it. But the real spiritual reason, the reason why a man wears a talis and wears tzitzit on his because the tzitzit are the same with a kippah. A kippah is a reminder that you have a God above you. It's a reminder you have a God above you. So a man needs to have a physical thing on his physical head to physically remind him that I'm not the greatest thing in the universe. There is something greater than me. Women naturally have this spiritual sensitivity. Women naturally have this awareness of something greater than them and their ability to incorporate all the different areas of their life. So for a woman, her spiritual identity and her physical identity, and that's just like for a woman, it's in general, a woman, her family identity and her work identity and her parents and her children and her husband, everything is all interconnected. They have a much harder time separating their lives. Men have no problem. The wife is one department of my life, and my job is a different department of my life, and my kids are a different department. Religion is a department. When I want to deal with religion, I'll pull it out, etc. So now, let us go back to the opening of tonight's class. The opening question, the opening dilemma that so many Jews struggle with when they see a religious Jew that observes commandments and say, it's too dogmatic, it's too one size fits all, it's too much of a box, and I feel that it's not for me. When we say that Judaism is a one size fits all, and you have to follow the rules, etc., and it's a mold, there's a truth to that statement, but it depends on what part of the person are you talking about. Are you talking about the body, or are you talking about the soul? Which means, the soul of a Jew is where our commonality lives. Although every single soul is unique, at the end of the day, all Jewish souls come from the exact same place. We all the same source. And if we didn't have bodies, my soul and your soul and her soul and his soul and every single one of our souls would understand each other perfectly. Perfectly we would get along. On a soul level, on a spiritual level, there's no room for disagreement between Jews. You know what divides us? The body. When I say the body, I mean the physical world. What divides Jews, and there's many Jews that are divided for many reasons, is not because of our souls. Our souls are the same. But it's our body. One person, whether it's money, whether it's politics, whether it's personalities, whether it's... each person has their own style, their own preferences, their own tolerances. And so if you're a person that's very into praying, you love to pray, someone else likes to talk and schmooze and yenta in the back, so there's disagreements. I don't hear the politics every week, but all of the issues between Jews from all of Jewish history has existed on the physical level, on the worldly level, on the gashmis, on the physicality of our existence. And on a body level, not only are we not the same, we are deliberately, divinely created by God to be unique. The Talmud says, there's a very famous statement in the Talmud and Brachas that says, Ein daitam, that the minds of a person, no two people have the same mind. The Ein partzufeim, and there's no two people have the same face. Shows like every snowflake is unique. God made every single human being with a different facial features. No two people have the exact same face. You know why? No two people have the exact same mind. So I think one way. I'm inspired by one kind of idea. I see life from one lens and one perspective. And you were designed by God to have a different perspective on life. So you have a different perspective on money. You have a different perspective on politics. You have a different perspective on the importance of religion, on Torah study, on prayer. And so every single one of us have differences, but all of those differences only exist regarding our physical identities. On a soul level, we're all the same. On a soul level, there's no division between us. This is the uniqueness of the circumcision that was bequeathed to us by Avraham Avinu. The ability to serve God, not only on a soul level, where me and you are exactly the same, where me and you do the same mitzvot and the same commandments because we're worshiping God, we're doing the commandments that our souls accepted from God at Mount Sinai, but rather, Abraham allowed us to serve God on the level of our bodies. Meaning, I am different than you. And you are different than him. And he is different than her. And she is different than the next person. And the idea of a circumcision is a relationship with God that exists with every single unique, different individual in their own perfectly unique way. I'm going to talk about these differences that exist on our body level, but I want to share one more idea that connects to this. I'm going to go back to what I just said. You all are familiar, I'm sure, with the famous blessing that God gives Abraham. God gives Abraham a promise. Also in this week's parsha. In this week's Torah reading, God tells Abraham that I promise you, I will surely bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heaven and as the sand of the seashore. Right? I'm sure you're all familiar with this blessing where God tells Abraham, your children will be as numerous as the stars of the sky and as the sand of the sea. At first glance, it would seem that these two metaphors are really two different ways of expressing the same thing. They're both expressing abundance. So Torah is being poetic, God is being poetic. So he says the sand, the stars of the sky, the sand of the sea. They're both saying the same thing. But the truth is that there's a very big difference between the abundance and the greatness, the vastness of the stars of the sky and of the sand of the sea. Stars are individually majestic. Every single star is important, every star is unique. Each star shines in its own unique way. Each star has a name, each star is mapped out into the constellations, and there's stargazers that can tell you, if you know the stars, each star has its own location, its own place. Every star is unique with its own name, its own identity. But sand is just sand. There's no difference between one piece of sand and the next piece of sand. There's no name for each grain of sand. You go to the beach, all the sand is the same sand. The difference between God saying the Jews will be like the stars of the sky and that will be like the sand of the sea is the difference between saying that we will be in a relationship with God on a soul level. We're on a soul level. Every single Jewish person's soul comes from the exact same place and on a deeper level, every single one of us have the same soul, that all of our souls are the same, versus saying that we all are stars of the sky. Every star of the sky is different. And on a physical level, each and every one of us is different. And that's why there's some of us that love Trump, and some of us that hate Trump, and some of us that love money, and some of us that hate money, and some of us that love fame and ego and pride, and some of us that want to hide in the corner and don't get embarrassed in the crowd. Some people that love, they're introverts and they love privacy, and some people are extroverts, and some people love to sing, and some people hate singing. That's the beauty of the stars of the sky. That we're unique, we're different. And this is what Avram gave us. Avram gave us the ability to have a relationship with God in your unique way. For someone to tell, and there's some Jews that think, in many religions, in all religions actually, that think that the only way, thank you, Jonathan. There's some people that think that the only way to be religious is to ignore the uniqueness of your individuality. The only way to be holy and spiritual is to put your talents on the side, to put your gifts on the side, to put your unique who you are on the side, and fit into them. Be holy. Leave your body away. Leave your talents aside. And of course, Judaism does not accept that approach. The Rebbe very, very strongly encouraged people to utilize their talents, utilize your God-given skills, utilize your unique personality. You have a lot of energy? Great. Channel your energy into something holy. Channel your holiness into something holy. The fact that I'll share with you 2 or 3 stories of the Rebbe that bring out this idea. There was a man that came to the Rebbe and he said to the Rebbe, what should I do to have an inflated ego? I have an ego. It's a problem. Judaism doesn't like ego. It should be humble. So the Rebbe told him, why get rid of it? Better use your ego to make yourself live up to the high expectations that you have of yourself. Meaning you think you're an amazing guy, you think you're so holy, you think you're so whatever. So live up to your own expectations. Push yourself to be the one that you think you're going to be. There were many people, the Rebbe didn't like people going to college. The Rebbe wanted people to go to yeshiva, study Torah. Why waste time in college? You can study Torah instead. However, anyone that was already in college, I don't say anyone, generally speaking, when someone's already in college and they start becoming religious and started coming closer to Torah, and they wanted to leave college, the Rebbe told them to stay. The Rebbe told them, you already have a gift. You already this is part of who you are. You have a degree, you have an education, you have a background. This is part of your identity. Don't ignore that part of your identity in serving God. You have to serve God with the identity that you have. The famous story is with Dr. Yaakov Anoka, very elder of Shalom, he passed away. But Yaakov Anoka was studying for a PhD in college. He somehow became very, very close to Judaism, to Chabad, and eventually he went to Crown Heights and he finally had a yechidus with the Rebbe, a private meeting with an audience with the Rebbe. And he told the Rebbe that he decided he's going to drop college, he's going to go to yeshiva full time. He was expecting that he's going to tell the Rebbe that I'm going to go to yeshiva and start to study full time. That's great. He was sure the Rebbe would be so happy. And the Rebbe told him the exact opposite. The Rebbe told him, I want you to go back to university and finish and get your PhD. So Dr. Hanoka began to counter the Rebbe and said, but if I go to yeshiva, I could become a rabbi. And I can go onto campus, and I could become a shliach, and I could become an outreach rabbi, and I could inspire more Jews, etc., etc. And the Rebbe told him, you'll accomplish more for Yiddishkeit with the 3 initials after your name. Meaning this is part of your unique identity. This is part of how you have to serve God. I'll tell you my favorite story. I didn't know the story until during the summer. We did a class on positivity bias. I read an amazing story. Short story, but this is the Rebbe's idea of how to channel the unique talents of a person. The generation of the hippies, the 60s, when the Jewish establishment was panicking and saying, what are we going to do with these crazy people? Everyone is in their meshugah. They're breaking all convention. They're breaking all norms, running around. They're not respecting the system. And the only Jewish leader that saw the tremendous potential of this was the Rebbe. And the Rebbe said it's a beautiful thing. Many, many stories the Rebbe told people that the hippies is true, that the youth of today are breaking convention because they're searching for meaning. They're not satisfied with empty, fluffy Judaism and just the words and the emptiness of Judaism was existing then. They want depth, they want meaning, they want real religion, real spirituality. And the Rebbe encouraged people to connect to the hippies and to inspire them and to bring them. The whole Baal Tshuva movement began because the Rebbe saw you have a wildness to you that's fantastic. How do we channel that into something holy? There was a young girl, Shainville Itkin. She was 14 years old, and I'm not exactly sure where she lived, but they opened a brand new Lubavitch Girls High School that year for her class. Her parents wanted her. I think it was in Pittsburgh, if I'm not mistaken. Her parents wanted her to go to the brand new Chabad Girls School. And she absolutely refused. She refused. And she said, I'm not going to go be a guinea pig in a brand new school that they're opening up, like 5 kids in the class. And I want to go to the established non-Chabad school. And that's where I want to go study. And I'm not interested in this in this new guinea pig school. And try as hard as they couldn't convince her to... they couldn't convince her. So finally, her father told her, she was a stubborn girl, you know what? Write to the Rebbe. Write to the Rebbe, and whatever the Rebbe will tell you, that's what you should do. Write to the Rebbe. Tell the Rebbe what you think. So she wrote. She was young. She was a little bit, we call a chutzpahniak. She was a little bit of a, bold. And she writes to the Rebbe a letter describing why she wanted to go to the new school that's just started. She wrote, I don't want to be a guinea pig. And the Rebbe took the word guinea pig, crossed out the word guinea pig, and wrote instead of Hebrew chalutza, which means a pioneer, a trailblazer. Trailblazer. You're a fighter. Absolutely, you're a fighter. But guess what? You can be a fighter to create something new. He changed her whole mindset. Don't look at it like you're a guinea pig. You're a trailblazer. You're a pioneer. And the Rebbe took her fighting spirit and turned it around. Challenged it into something holy. This is the message for us. It's true that we do a bris because it was a mitzvah at Har Sinai to do a bris. But that's just the technical part of it. You know what we inherited from Avram Avinu in this week's Torah reading? The character, the essence of a bris. The essence of a bris is the ability that I, in my unique physical identity, I, with all of my quirks, with all of my issues, with all of my foibles, and all of my flaws, and all of my individuality, I, exactly as I am, that I can have a spiritual relationship with God in your physical identity, with your physical character, with your unique style, with your unique personality. That's where you're going to have the ultimate relationship with God. My friend, I bless you. Let us learn to worship God, to serve God as we are, with every aspect of our identity. Take whatever you have, whatever talent, whatever skill, whatever you think might even be a flaw, your stubbornness, your ego, your charisma, your energy, your passion, your studiousness, whatever it is. Take that quality, take that personality, and give that a circumcision. Transform that into the physical home of a spiritual relationship with God Almighty. My friends, I wish you all a good night. And I look forward to seeing you again for some classes later on this week. Tomorrow night we'll do a short story time on someone from history, as we're doing on Tuesday nights. And God willing, on Thursday night will be a continuation of last week's. We got a lot of feedback on last Thursday night. We did an interview with a breast cancer survivor. And this Thursday night is still October. It's breast cancer awareness. The BRCA gene is something which is very prevalent in the Jewish community, especially in the Ashkenazi community. We'll be speaking to some other ladies in our community that have dealt with breast cancer, and also with a doctor to more of a practical awareness of how to deal with breast cancer and preventative steps if you want to get genetically tested and what will be the purpose of it. This is for men too, by the way. But the bris is more for men. The breast cancer is not only for women, it's for men too. we'll discuss that, God willing, Thursday night at 8 p.m. right here on our Facebook page or on mychabadcenter.org/live class. And finally, God willing, not this coming Tuesday, but the Tuesday after, we'll be starting our next series, the spiritual secrets of the Bible, 6 stories that you know, but 6 stories that you don't know. Join us. If you need a scholarship, let me know. Starting, God willing, next Tuesday, you can sign up online, mychabadcenter.org/JLI. Thank you, my friends. Thank you for all the compliments that we're getting. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. I look forward to seeing you again, obviously, next Monday night at 8 p.m. Thank you, Mindy. Thank you, Yonatan. And Lori, I see Lori is watching. Lori, Liora, Bas, Phyllis, you should have a complete refuah shleima. You should recover from your surgery completely well and healthy and be only gesund, solange yarin, as we say. Take care, my friends, and good night.